Alokesh. It's time for the final panel, and I'm certain it will help us end the program with a bang. A little bit of a context setting here. In a pandemic hit world, technology, as we all know, has been a huge enabler and across sectors. But education is special when it comes to the enabling feature of technology. The formal Indian education system has a big catch up to do with data, AI, and technology. And this is the gap, perhaps, that edtech startups are bridging.
Yes, indeed. That's absolutely right. And in fact, if there's anything that has disrupted the education ecosystem in India, it is this emergence of the strong edtech companies, founded by visionary entrepreneurs. So let's take a cue from our last panel where we heard about how online education is a $5 billion opportunity. It makes it an attractive destination for edtech startups and investors.
But perhaps the true test of the market will be determined by how much time it will take to mature and attract growth capital and how fast that can happen. We will find answers to it in this panel, and let's take a quick look at the panelists. We have with us Ronnie Screwvala, Chairman and Co-founder ET-upGrad, Gopal Jain, Managing Partner, Gaja Capital.
And we have Amit Patel, the Managing Director of Owl Ventures, and Siddhartha Nigam, National Managing Partner of Clients and Markets at Grand Thornton, Bharat.
So without much ado, let's just dive straight into the discussion. Alokesh, I'll begin with the first question. And my first question is to Gopal and Amit, whoever wants to take it first. You are the guys who put your investors' money in tech companies and they're entrepreneurs. So give us a sense of how you see the ecosystem now, because data shows a near 44% growth in risk capital infusion in the tech sector between 2016 to 2019. And also, when do you see this sector maturing to attract growth capital?
Amit, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to kick things off. And thank you, first of all, to Economic Times and ET-upGrad for inviting us to be a part of this panel.
It's been a pleasure.
Event. Thank you. I think, if you look at the last decade, there's been a variety of infrastructure issues that have been present, not only kind of in India, but globally speaking, when it comes to kind of really creating and scaling education technology companies. And specifically what I mean by that is if you look access to high-speed broadband internet connections, as well as access to connected devices, even in a country like the United States, less than 10% of schools in 2010 had access to high-speed broadband internet. And so if you're thinking about kind of creating and scaling an education technology company in that type of environment, it's going to be extremely challenging and extremely difficult. And now you fast forward to the world that we live in today, connected devices as well as high-speed broadband internet access is kind of exponentially increasing. And as you have that infrastructure coming into place, I think you have the ability to quickly create and scale education technology companies, which is why we're starting to see kind of growth stage capital being attracted to the sector, once again, in India as well as around the world. And so this is kind of, we believe just the beginning stages of what's going to be kind of a golden era for education technology to come forward over the next coming decades.
Okay, go to Gopal.
Yeah, sure. We've been investing in education for 15 years. And I think we used to think that education is where healthcare was 20 years ago. But clearly COVID has acted like a lightning rod as far as investor interest.
I thought healthcare is still where it was 20 years ago, but anyway.
It's a long way to go. I think it's a couple of things. A, if you see the amount of consumer spend in education, if you contrast it to the amount of market cap that's been created by education, it pales in comparison when you compare it to other sectors in consumer like healthcare, etc. And that is the big opportunity for entrepreneurs. I think also what COVID has highlighted is that there is a substantial turf available to entrepreneurs. Things have received a real boost, a real acceleration in terms of investor interest, but more importantly, I think in terms of entrepreneurial interest.
Okay. I'll take the question to Ronnie and Siddharth both. India's education system has had this complaint very often that there's a education outcomes gap, and this is well known. But now with deep smartphone penetration, availability of cheap data, what is this real scope of the tech sector?
Yeah, so that's you want to go first? No, Ronnie, go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I think outcomes is a very, very, very important word when you look at the entire, especially when you look at the digital space. And actually, to be honest, what I think can be tracked as outcomes in the digital space is going to be much more specific than even a classroom of 150. Because when you're looking at the technology that's been there today, and especially what we practice at UpGrad, the tech platform allows you to have peer-to-peer learning much, much higher than anywhere else. The second part of measuring outcomes is that we can now almost get into a technology, and we do that, where a counselor calls one of our students actually and says, hey, you spent more than 3 times you looked at the same video. Is there a reason why you did that? Are you uncomfortable with that chapter? Can we help you with that? So when you're looking at that kind of feedback, that's one element of being able to get outcomes, because the first outcome is, are you graduating? Are you completing your course? And are you being able to do that? And I think online is normally looked at as a very anonymous medium. You can be a dropout by just not logging on the next day. And I think how do we take out anonymity from online education is one of the most important challenges that we faced. And I think we've combated that to get to that level. The second one is, when you're doing degrees at an undergrad or grad level, the outcome is really get your first job. But the real one, like in entrepreneurship, it's not the first funding that's the challenge. It's your second funding and your third funding that's a bigger challenge than your first one. And as a first generation entrepreneur, I know that better than anybody else, is again, when you're in a job, and then when you're 3 years into your career, you're 6 years into your career, you're 9 years into your career, that's when the stress points of you being redundant is even more challenging. So how do you measure outcomes where you're going to be able to stand your own? And I think part of the problem in many emerging markets and developed countries is the level of soft skills and the level of what I would call the confidence levels, the conviction levels in people. So today, online education is a mixture of being able to impart soft skills along with hard skills and at very mature levels of age. So that to me are some of the criteria for outcome that we kind of judge all the time.
Yeah, just to add on to what Ronnie said, I think, again, learning, education about 2 things, learning and employability. In our context, employability for a wider part of our population is an important element of getting educated. Now, what has technology done? I think it's done 3 or 4 things different from, what was formal offline education. One is there is access available to students. Secondly, there's access available to the learning part of it. You can literally deliver from anywhere in the world. Second, I think it is also flexibility, because if I look at the last 7 decades in India, a lot of people drop out of school or don't go to school because they actually have to work to make ends meet. I think online education provides that flexibility to literally learn anytime, anywhere. And I think the third piece is the constant evolution of being able to deliver that over a smart device or actually a phone, which again, has taken out a lot of the hardware challenges which existed. Now that coupled with, the kind of analytics that Ronnie talked about can actually help almost provide a bespoke learning to an individual. And also the outcome, I would say still to a large part of the population is to get employed after that. And I think if online education can, expedite that and, make that more effective, that's really the outcome that, in my view, is the best outcome for the
I feel like chiming in here, because
go ahead.
When you come in from the company side, I think the real impact of what we are witnessing today will be seen in 10 years. So we talk about digital native companies, digital native universities, digital native educational providers. UpGrad is a great example. But what about digital native learners? So the real impact of what we're seeing right now is that we are creating a generation of digital native learners. All said and done, people like me will struggle with being digital learners to some extent or the other. But my 13-year-old and my 9-year-old, they are in a different paradigm altogether. So the real impact of what we are seeing today will be felt in 10 years.
Absolutely. My 15-year-old is also in that same league, right? So we are all on the same level playing field. But this discussion is really on promoting entrepreneurship. So let us get to the entrepreneur. And basically, I just love this kind of panel, where you have one entrepreneur and you have 2 investors who are investing in entrepreneurs, and you have an expert who can sit from outside and say, yeah, you guys are not doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing, that kind of thing. So my question to all of you, and just angle it differently, right? So to my question to Ronnie is, now everybody wants to be Ronnie Screwvala, right? Be a be a mathematics, celebrity when you're in television in Doordarshan times to what you are today. It's been an amazing journey. And are you an exception, or would you like, how can we make this more common than the exception that Ronnie is today? So I'd like to hear that from Ronnie's own perspective as to how we can get more entrepreneurs to get interested in education. And I'd like to ask the same question to Gopal, Siddhartha, and Amit as to how can we create more Ronnies in our system? So
well, firstly,
yeah,
well, absolutely no question. Why should anyone be an exception? I think each one is to their own. I come from a lower middle class family, and I think first generation entrepreneurship is the real core. And I think in India, we don't need 1,000, 2,000, we need around 1 million of them. Because if 1 million of them can generate between 100 to 10 to 100 jobs, I think our problem is solved. Because otherwise we'll keep talking about skilling, and skilling is creating some sense of supply, and the demand on jobs is just not going to be there. So I think my moral responsibility as one of many, many entrepreneurs is to keep that going. So I think it's not that. It's about this complete DNA for first generation entrepreneurship, which I think this country is lacking. And I think part of that is because I think we sit on the fence. We have a little fear for failure. And as I keep telling everyone, first the word is fear. 90% of the time you're fearful, and therefore you don't even want to get to the failure part. Except that once you fail, you're no longer fearful. And all we need to do is get over that mound. And I think that's one of the ones that we kind of push to do forward. I think as one looks at it today, the younger generation is looking at a mixture of impact along with business sense. And I think that's a phenomenal trend that I've seen with people. When they're having a conversation, they want to solve a problem. They want to create something with impact. And I think education, healthcare, many others come into that category. So actually, I'm quite hopeful that we will stir up over the next 10 years a lot in terms of self-entrepreneurship. Because in India, self-entrepreneurship has really been the Kirana store. It's been that one or two people who've been self-employed rather than being entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is about creating a wave. It's about creating businesses at scale. The biggest thing that we have to solve in education today is to solve a problem at scale. And I'm obsessed with that thought process. And I think that's why the digital medium and online, the biggest differentiator for me is the offline medium is a selective medium. And actually the online medium to solve has to be a more eliminative medium. It's about a few people that will guide and say, maybe you're not ready to take this course. So why don't you come back a year later and we'll help you with that? Versus a university that looks at their brand, rightly so, that says, if I pick the best 5,000 people, I'll churn out the best 5,000 people. So if we can make this shift in our education system also between online and offline, I think we'll solve a lot of problems.
I'll take off from what Ronnie had to say. He made a very point about the first generation entrepreneurs. Fear, he said, that's a mindset issue he spoke about. I want to take this question to Gopal and Amit. Do you think it's fear, or when you hear pitches from entrepreneurs, do you think that the true innovative spark is perhaps missing?
I don't, so yes, I think actually, if you see, Ronnie has said both things. On one hand, we're talking about first generation entrepreneurs. I think the real issue in India is not the lack of entrepreneurship. 55% of Indians are self-employed. The real issue in India is our inability to create scalable businesses.
Absolutely.
So we are a nation full of dwarf-sized businesses, right? We don't create scalable businesses. So the question, and I think this Ronnie said in the second part of his comments, is it's not just about entrepreneurship. It's about entrepreneurship in the context of scaled world-class businesses, right? And for that, it takes two to tango. But the first part is, for the first time in many years, the addressable market is looking truly exciting, right? So the addressable market has expanded. It's always been large, but it's looking even more exciting. And within that, the tags are looking very interesting, because first generation entrepreneurs, people who come from a certain educational background, people who are looking for linear paths in life are looking for those tags. And one of those tags, technology. Second very important tag, Ronnie said, is impact. And the third very important tag is assessments, outcomes, industry interface. These are all three kind of linked together. Assessments, outcomes, industry interface. So these tags are making the addressable market look really interesting. The weak part of this, the policies, and I'll come to that later. I think we can take this to another level. If you really want to build 100 scalable businesses in education in India in a shorter period of time, then we have to ask ourselves also about the right policy initiatives.
Yeah.
We should go there last because we can spend the rest of the evening, afternoon talking about policy. But coming back here, I think addressable markets looking interesting and the tags are looking really interesting.
And we are hopeful that you will spend more money on, putting money into and getting us more and more entrepreneurs like Ronnie who can take
Well,
out.
I don't think Gaja capital has ever been an issue. Our interest in education has not been the issue. You need 100 Gaja capitals.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a contrarian point here before Amit
Yeah.
goes. I think the other part about entrepreneurship is there can't be a total fetish that without funding, you can't build a business. I think funding is an essential part. It's one of multiple criterions. And I think that's also a myth we need to shatter here. I think the first business I started was a media company at 37,500. I've been fortunate to launch upGrad with a higher capital base, hopefully with a higher ROI on that context. But I think we get a little too stuck on capital raising as a prerequisite to build scalable businesses. There is a merit for that, but there's also should not be an obsession for it.
So where do we get stuck? Is it the idea, or is it that we do not know how to build a business? What is it?
No, I think we get stuck with our glass ceilings a lot. And glass ceilings are meant only to be broken. That's why they're called glass ceilings. Otherwise, they'd be concrete ceilings. But I'm taking it away from Amit, so I think I'll let him.
No.
No.
I think has a question to Amit, a specific question to Amit, yeah?
No, I will, but let him answer this question first.
Sure.
Yeah, so the simplest way to answer your first question is if we could figure out how to clone Ronnie, that would solve kind of the issue of how do we get 100 or 1,000 entrepreneurs.
But that is
like
ethical
that.
issues.
There you go.
We'll have
there you
ethical
go.
problems.
Yeah.
There you go. But in all seriousness, I think entrepreneurship is one of the most courageous paths that anyone can take. And Ronnie mentioned this kind of need for having like kind of a cycle that we've kind of talked about before, which is, hey, in order to attract entrepreneurs to the sector, you need to have capital coming into the space that is willing to make kind of not just early stage bets, they're willing to make mid-stage bets. They're also willing to make growth stage capital investments as well. And then you need to have the proof points that exist that show the success stories that have happened in the space. And I think in India, in the education technology sector, you are starting to see that. And that's what creates the flywheel effect, which is going to have more talent, more entrepreneurs come into the space, more capital, and then kind of have that get started that way. I think the second thing that I'll make the point is, entrepreneurship is something that this generation is really going after, right? It's like, if you think about kind of the star status that entrepreneurs are getting in the world that we live in right now, it's on par with, kind of Bollywood celebrities, as well as like kind of sports figures and things like that. And so from that perspective, I think the next generation that's coming up is not saying necessarily, hey, how do I go and work for, kind of the big company and things like that? They're saying, how do I actually go and have the impact that I want to have on this world? And then coming back to kind of Gopal's point, is this next generation really wants to have an impact, right? And they're looking for ways that they can actually change this world. And education happens to be one of the best ways you can have that impact on this world. And so I think we're starting to see the quality and influx of talent into the sector, just get higher and higher every single year.
I want to take that observation to Siddhartha because what the investors themselves are seeing. Are you also seeing that as an independent observer?
Yeah, Alokesh. So I'd like to make a different point. I think we have to look back into history on why there are fewer entrepreneurs in education compared to other sectors. I think it is to do with the halo that we had around somebody who was an educationist. Money was not good. You became an educationist for doing service to the society, and hence even we will talk about it, that how the structural impediments in the sector are as a result of that it was a not-for-profit sector. The idea was to create educational institutions which existed for a higher purpose as opposed to creating value for stakeholders. Now that itself had become and still continues to be a bottleneck for attracting investment into the broader sector. I think with technology or ed tech, some of those paradigms have changed, but I think I still see a challenge in getting experienced folks from the sector to become entrepreneurs, given that that's really the factory through which they passed. I think also the other issue that we have here, and Ronnie talked about, is I think people don't businesses don't become successful due to lack of funding. I think funding is an important element. But where the challenge comes is if businesses are being created only to be, sold or to create value, I think that's where that short-term view on education as a sector again becomes I would say a block, mindset block, because this is something we have to really see the impact. We have to have a 5, 10, 15-year view on the impact you'll be able to make as an entrepreneur, and hence the value that will get created over that period of time.
We have over 300 participants, audience listening into us, and there are close to 30 questions. So this is a question we had, and it's a question that's coming in from an attendee as well. I'll take it to both Gopal and Amit, whoever wants to go at it first. Which is the most exciting segment as far as EdTech in India is concerned? Is it the K-12 space? Is it the entrance exam space? Is it the professional certification upskilling space? Is the question coming in from the attendee. And I want to ask you, what about vernacular education? Is that an exciting space? Amit, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. Al Ventures, we're an education technology focused venture capital fund. And so we invest across the education spectrum. And my answer to kind of that question would be a little bit of all of the above. I think to date, we've made a few investments that have been in specifically kind of the K-12 sector. So we were investors in both Byju's as well as White Hat Junior, and kind of continue to believe that that has obviously been a very exciting category when it comes to the Indian EdTech sector. But similarly, I think as you look at kind of the higher education sector and the future of work and workforce development, companies like ET-upGrad are also extremely exciting, and I think are doing extremely innovative things that are not just unique and applicable to the India market, but can be leveraged on a global basis. And I think that's something that particularly makes companies in India very, very exciting, is the fact that a lot of the companies that are getting started here, and I think one of the previous panels mentioned this, is it's starting companies that are not only going to serve students based in India, but could serve students around the world. And I think that's something that's really unique to companies that are based in India. And we're seeing that kind of across the spectrum.
Okay.
Gopal?
Well, I can't help but agree that it's, so let me add a nuance to it, that because there are opportunities in every part of the sector, we've invested successfully in preschools and schools and vocational. I think it's about the quality of the entrepreneur and the partner. So finally, it's also about the person behind the wheels that really matters. This entire disruption in the last 6 or 9 months is going to leave behind a changed world. I mean, just look at higher education. We used to talk about blended learning, but mainstream higher education has become blended, right? Look at K-12. I mean, K-12, and there was no concept of blended learning in K-12. K-12 has discovered blended learning, and it's here to stay, right? So schools have discovered that students have another 3 hours at home that they can use that very effectively with technology. So coming back to your question, it's not about A versus B or C. The addressable market in many segments is very large. I think for us, finally, the choices are about, the partner also.
So what is the most important thing, the idea or the man behind the wheel?
I'm a people-oriented person, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur investor. Entrepreneurs have a different way of looking at the world. There are times when the market creates a venture, and there are times when people create ventures. But really, our business starts by backing people. I think it's a chicken and egg situation, but here I can say the people part comes first.
Yeah, actually, I think this first mover advantage thing, personally, I feel that it's a little overhyped. It's not about first mover or third mover. It's about who executes best and who has the best vision for the long term. And coming to your point, on the quality of the entrepreneur. So, it's not just about the quality of the entrepreneur, but also about how you're going to take things forward with the business model that you have. So for Ronnie, for example, if I'd like to ask you, how do you think about, overcoming concerns? Because what happens in education is that education is extremely critical for everybody, right? Right from nursery to, PhD and thereafter. And I've known people who have sold their land, to get their children into an educational institute by an entrepreneur, which turned out to be a hoax and turned out to be false, right? So that kind of situation, what happens is the merit and the quality of the brand that is offering it is of extremely high critical importance, right? People don't take very kindly to institutes that advertise too much, for example, because like somebody mentioned in the previous panel, education has been seen more as a social thing than a business thing. So, you're making money, you're advertising, isme kuch gadbad hai, right? So that is the general feeling. But so as an entrepreneur, how would you not only yourself, but advise other entrepreneurs, how can they overcome these concerns about maintaining the quality of the content, about their, end means, and also how do you keep your cost of student acquisition low?
Yeah, I think these are all very, very relevant points. My absolutely very singular answer would be think of it in the long term. If you're going to think of anything in the short term, then you're going to have challenges with everything that you're doing here. And specifically in education, you will create value. You will create value in the short, medium, and long term. But you have to think long term, because then you won't, then a lot of what you raised here, yes, we need to change mindsets in the not-for-profit space to the for-profit space. And frankly, I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as for less profit. And there's a whole element of social entrepreneurship in this country or in many places, which is where people feel, I need to do something, but I won't do it for too much profit. And my sense is that doesn't work. Either it's a not-for-profit or it's for-profit, because then with that for-profit, you can solve at scale. So my first thing to a lot of people in the education sector is, if you're looking at this, be very clear if it's hardcore for-profit or not-for-profit. And don't try and say, oh, but it's a high impact sector, so maybe I'll do it for subsidized profit, because you won't attract capital, you won't scale, you won't solve problems at scale. Second, therefore, comes to really solving it at the impact level. And I think that's pretty much, if you can look at it from the long-term point of view, everything else melts, because credibility is long-term. It can't be built with an advertising campaign. That's awareness. What you really need to build in credibility is a long-term. It has to be, it's a slow process. And I don't mean you can accelerate that process, but after some stage you can't. So if you're looking for a lot of quick fixes, it's not going to happen. But can you keep a pace? Absolutely. I think technology is allowing us to get a momentum and a pace of execution, which is quite incredible. And at a capacity that is huge. When we have a class of 1,000 people in one of our cohorts, the engagement level in that class of 1,000 is much more than the class of 100. So what does that actually prove, right? Because the peer-to-peer learning element, the entire element of buzz, as you call it in education, because even when you're looking at education, there's a sense of student competitiveness. I mean, part of the reason why some of the US universities excel today is their spirit of competitiveness that they teach. How do we bring that element of competitiveness even in the learning element of what is being taught across the globe? Because actually that's a very subtle point, but a very important point, because that prepares you for the real life and the real world. And so those are elements where I would say, but in summation, I would say, be clear if it's for-profit or not for-profit, and think of it as long-term.
I'll come to Siddhartha. This is a very interesting question coming in from the audience. It's from Rishikesh Dave. He's talking about the importance of leadership in entrepreneurship. And he's then drawing our attention to the NEP and saying how the focus has been on skill development rather than producing entrepreneurs. Is that the real problem in India? Is that at all a problem in India?
So I don't think there is a problem in that. I alluded to education having two parts, learning and employability. I think skilling is really addressing the employability issue, which is extremely important. We have to realize that there are, I think, about 40% of our workforce earns today, eats tomorrow, right? And if people come with that economic burden, it's important that any education of any sort should get them employability. And I think skilling is addressing that. We have traditionally, the government set up the ITI network, which was exactly supposed to do that, skill people in vocational jobs so that they can, go out, get employment, and make sure that they can provide for their family. Today, I think when we look at that, there is almost intermingling of those two things, because again, I was listening to the panel before this. There is room for formal education. Formal education provides you with learning, exposure, a lot of, I would say, thoughts and ideas that it encourages you to, think. Whereas skilling allows you to, get that edge that you require to be successful. So I would say that those two things have to marry. And even, your education doesn't finish once you get a job, right? There's a whole concept of upgradation, and I think The
lifelong
platform
learning, we heard in the previous panel.
So platform that Ronnie set up, part of that is also addressing corporates like ourselves, saying that you've got this, so-called workforce which is highly educated, but how do we make them more effective? Because you don't stop at 20 or 21. You can continue to upgrade your skills in various ways and forms in the areas that you function.
Absolutely.
I just want to add a little point to that, because I think the question was more, this is on the basic premise that can entrepreneurship be taught? And that's a question that all of us keep asking ourselves a lot of the time. So an education policy is not going to focus on entrepreneurship, because the basic premise is entrepreneurship cannot be taught. I'm of the school that 50%, you're right, it can't be taught, but there's a 50% that if it can be taught, we can make some really superb entrepreneurs. Because, if you can teach idea validation, risk-taking, you can't teach. The element of getting gut feels to what you want to do, the impetus, the passion, those are not things you can teach. But there's so much that you can teach in entrepreneurship that can actually take it to the next level.
Of course, Ronnie. So that is the next course coming up in ET-upGrad, right?
Let me come in here and give you an example. So 30 years ago, 28 years ago, when I graduated on a typical IIT campus, 99% of people were looking for a job. Right? Either in India or abroad. And after 99%, let's say 75% were looking for a job abroad. Today on a typical IIT campus, 80 to 90% are looking to do a startup. Now, how has that changed? Has the curriculum changed? No, it hasn't, right? In fact, has it become easier, or has the socio-economic profile of students changed? So to go back to Ronnie's point, what creates entrepreneurs is a whole host of enabling factors. So, and just think about it, what has changed in 30 years? The market's become larger. There's so much more startup capital available. There are incubators on campus. So nobody's chasing that $40,000 a year job. Can you imagine? Yeah, that's all it took, $40,000 a year to take an IIT out of India. And
absolutely right.
So it's not teaching alone that creates an entrepreneur. It's a whole host of enabling factors.
See, the problem is, Gopal, while you're right, and incidentally, there is an Institute of Entrepreneurship in India, Suchetana. At some point I will find it and I'll send you a link for it. Sure. But where they teach people how to be entrepreneurs. I don't know how successful they are.
I belong to the category that Ronnie described earlier, the fence sitters, the fearful ones.
Yeah. But the point of India's education, one of the things that I raised in the previous panel, and probably we'll keep this as the last question, for this session. The fact is that India's education is not only about the cities, right, and the towns. And if you look at the situation after COVID struck, and specifically after the lockdown, the number that I quoted in the previous panel was that 80% of government school children, their education has stopped completely after COVID has struck, because they don't have the laptops, they don't have the phones, they don't have the network connections. Even in cities, right? Not only, and you can imagine the situation in villages. Now, it's going to ask quite a lot for, entrepreneurs like Ronnie, like ET-upGrad and Byju's to get into there. But you need innovative models to address the situation in those areas, because they also need the education, right? They may not subscribe to the model that works in the city. But how can we encourage and find entrepreneurs in those areas who can be supported to provide innovative solutions that work there?
I'll give you my live examples. And this is not wearing my ET-upGrad hat, but wearing my not-for-profit Swadesh Foundation hat on. We work with 1,200 schools and 800 Anganwadis in rural Maharashtra. We have now created about 16,000 entrepreneurs in the Swadesh Foundation, from casual entrepreneurs to multiple entrepreneurs to people who are running chilling plants for dairy, for the dairy supply people to come in there. And these are all people at an absolute rural level. The one thing we have to change in the education system is to raise aspiration levels for the other half. That's 600 million people. The biggest thing I've learned when I'm working in the not-for-profit space is one word. It's called lifting aspirations. And I think if we can do that, we can change a lot in the entrepreneur stage when it comes to the rural part. The second, I know we talk about connectivity, but people find solutions. Right now in our 1,200 schools, we've moved from Swadesh to Swadesh Digital, and we're actually imparting. We're doing libraries, we're doing storytelling with the lower classes, and we're doing maths classes, etc., all on digital. whoever can't have connectivity huddles in a group. So 6 kids come into one household where the network is better. They figure their solutions out. Parents are being able to do that. So I think I'm very exhilarated and excited about that to-do approach, even when it comes to rural India. I don't think it's going to convert into a business right now. But if those people can raise their aspiration levels, which is our moral responsibility, we can change a lot.
100%, nearly 100% of Indians have access to a digital device, to a mobile phone. Nearly 75% of Indians have access to the internet. So if you have a 50% failure in private schools and a 90% failure in government schools, then clearly it's not the consumers that have failed. It's the providers who have failed. You see my point? That, and if you want, if the way out of this is to open this up, let a million revolutions happen. We still as a country haven't invited the private sector wholeheartedly, entrepreneurs wholeheartedly, to solve what is arguably one of the largest human problems on the planet, which is how are you going to educate India and how are you going to skill India? Educating India and skilling India are massive problems. Can we really solve these problems without partnership with the private sector? So it's not the consumers. Consumers have made up their mind. Private India has made up its mind. It doesn't have any hang-ups about for-profit, not-for-profit. More than 50% of all incremental enrollments in our K-12 system are happening in private schools. Government schools are shutting down by hundreds. Public India hasn't made up its mind, and it needs to make up its mind quickly.
If I may, just what Gopal said, I think there is a desire for the public-private partnership, at least the areas that we operate in, and again going back to entrepreneurship, I'll go to skilling. Government's initiative to skill, providing the infrastructure has been around, but I think one of the things that they've done quite successfully is set up organizations such as NSDC, who actually fund small entrepreneurs who are involved in providing skilling, which leads to employment. So somewhere that is, in my mind, is a real public-private partnership where you're encouraging entrepreneurs, you're taking the lack of funding away, but you're also looking at the impact that's going to create. I think that public-private partnership has to play a much larger role as we try and address what I call the formal education system. And in the current pandemic, this work from anywhere, study from anywhere is really the model that has got tested. Today, there are many media, and if people don't have access to hardware, Ronnie talked about, shared hardware, we have ways to reach the corners of the country, really the up country, and see where that device is. Can we look at the medium of instruction? I mean, some entrepreneurs to come up saying that, listen, today, lack of bandwidth, lack of hardware, how do we actually still operate and provide education to people? And I think that's really the opportunity. And Gopal, you talked about IIT. The aspiration was to get a job and move out, right? That, in my view, if I look back 25, 30 years ago, that was an opportunity, or that was an aspiration to get an opportunity to be an entrepreneur in the US or wherever else. That opportunity did not exist today. I think a lot of the folks who migrated are very successful entrepreneurs in different geographies. So I think we have that. We have in our DNA of being an entrepreneur. I think it was just a matter of getting the opportunity. So I'm quite optimistic and bullish about India's entrepreneurial DNA, and hope to see many more successful entrepreneurs in the decades to come focus on education.
I'll take the question to Amit. Yes, please.
So I'll just make kind of two points. So one is when it comes to kind of education technology solutions, I think the advantage that education technology presents is you can really deliver that personalized learning. If you wanted to do kind of the one-on-one instruction or the one-on small group instruction, which all of the academic research has shown, like kind of that's the best form of instruction that can actually exist. And the other thing is that coming back to your point about kind of accessibility and kind of meeting the learner where they are, anyone can access this education regardless of where you live. You don't need to be within a certain mile radius of a certain instructor or a certain campus to actually get access to that education. So I think that's point number one about what makes these education technology solutions very exciting. I'd say the second thing that's making this kind of particularly exciting is, you know, if you look at kind of the education system, it's been like siloed in the sense that, you know, the K through 12 education system is, you know, kind of viewing the responsibility as just, hey, we need to graduate them from K through 12. And then it's up to colleges to say, hey, all our responsibilities kind of graduate them from universities. And then the employer is saying, you know, hey, what about the skills that we need to kind of have them be employable within the university and things like that. And so what you're having is now companies such as ET-upGrad kind of come into the ecosystem and where they're saying, hey, we're actually taking the full responsibility of not just graduating from our program, but we're also saying that it matters what type of job you get, kind of what is the salary increase that you're going to get, and what is the impact that we have on your like kind of lifelong career trajectory. And I think breaking down these silos, breaking down these barriers is kind of the potential that we need to invest in to make these like education technology companies be long lasting and take that real long-term approach that, you know, Siddhartha and others were mentioning on this panel.
It was an absolute delight having all of you. We've completely run out of time. The entire summit was very engaging, and what a way to end the day with this session. It was great hearing all of your views. We spoke about entrepreneurship, its social impact on India, and how, as Gopal pointed out, that perhaps we are on the cusp of 1 million entrepreneurs blossoming across the country. Ronnie spoke from experience to show that all these ideas will perhaps take the experience of being an entrepreneur to even the farthest corner of the country. Siddhartha, Amit, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, Gopal and Ronnie, for taking the time out and for this enriching experience for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
Thanks,